Welcome to another edition of Willow World. My name's Joshua Ridley, the CEO and co-founder of Willow. Over the last few months, we've been sharing stories from London, New York, Sydney. Well, today, we're going to go back to New York. I'm going to speak with Scott Rechler. Scott's a friend and a CEO of RXR Realty. Scott's been through some really tough times, like what he's experiencing now. I'm sure you will be inspired, as I've been inspired, to hear from Scott and the way he's led his company RXR, but also how he's leading as a citizen of New York and a leader in real estate. Welcome, Scott.
It's great to be here, Josh. Thanks for having me.
You've got a multi-billion-dollar real estate company in New York. You've served on the board of commissioners of the Port Authority at New York and in New Jersey. You've also been on the board of the National 9/11 Memorial Museum. It's a great pleasure to have you here today. Looking forward to hearing your story. Well, Scott, 2020, what a year, hey? It's been a big year for you and everyone else. What's it been like in New York? How are you going?
New York, we were the epicenter of this crisis. And so as things began to unfold in February and into March, there was a tremendous amount of uncertainty as to really what was happening and what was to come. And it was almost like, you had to think of a medical analogy that, we were going into, our whole body was going into shock, that everything was shutting down. Really, no one knew exactly what was the cause and what was going to come next. And then I think, we sort of put ourselves into this self-induced coma of everyone, the working from home concept. And then, April was a tough period because we had, a significant amount of losses of life in April. And I think we all tried to prepare ourselves for what was to come, but it's hard. We at RXR lost 6 of our team members to COVID in just the month of April. And so, when we talk about this a lot in theory, when you talk about people's lives that have been with you for a lot of years, it makes it really personal. And so, I think New York, as now we've come out the other side and have been able to flatten the curve, and out of the United States, I think of doing the best job of now containing the spread of the virus with maintaining an infectious rate of the people tested of less than 1% for probably 45 days now. Have over 100,000 people just in New York tested per day. So I think we're making it, but there's still a tremendous amount of anxiety and post traumatic stress disorder type feelings for people of what we lived through, and also the need for encouraging people to stay at home. Part of the way to do that with New Yorkers is you just can't say please stay at home. You have to scare them to really do it, and so people have that fear. And so getting people over that anxiety and realizing that that we can move forward again in a safe, responsible way, and it's not going to be business as usual. And as I like to say, we're living in this period of the new abnormal until we ultimately can find the right mix of therapeutics and testing and vaccines. But it's harder to get done, and I think it's the people and their families have concerns about people going back to the workplace, et cetera. But the other part of that is that you've had during that crisis, in New York, we really had the essential workers, the healthcare workers, the people keeping our economy, our buildings running, our streets safe. They were out there in the heat of the worst of this thing, right? And so you feel like someone like me that there's they did their job. Now it's time for us to do our job, right? And that the baton is being handed to the business leaders and others to come back to the city and help us now start the recovery process.
Scott, that concept of the baton being passed is a really strong concept, something that has resonated with me as a business leader and as someone that loves cities and loves New York. Just take me back to 75 Rock, which is your headquarters. For those that are watching this or listening in, back to March, April, you're right in the center of Midtown, the most vibrant part of New York City, maybe one of the most vibrant parts of the planet. What was it like, just that that moment when it was full of people, full of tourists, Times Square's pumping, and then it's not? Like, what was it like for you? How did you feel?
It's interesting. My first exposure to realizing that this is going to be challenging was in January. I was in Hong Kong meeting with one of our large investors the third week in January, and they were describing some of what was happening. By the time I got back to the airport to leave back to New York, they already had set up lines and were taking everyone's temperature before they let you into the airport. And so when I landed, I began to call our advisors and that in the public health world and people from the state that might have some insights into this, as well as reach out to our tenants that have global footprints, particularly in Asia, to try to understand what the dynamic would be. And we started at that point, probably the first week of February, our COVID task force that's met every morning from then till today, which we now have about 50 people on that task force that's focusing on responding to the immediately was the public health crisis and the challenges we were going to face and figure out how we were going to navigate our way through that, but also now the recovery and the rebound on the other side, and having our teams there. And so we were seeing this coming, but it was almost like in slow motion, and you knew something might happen. And actually on March 5th, I believe, I was in Seattle at Microsoft's offices.
Oh, yes.
And I was meeting with a senior woman who runs the marketing for Microsoft. And she actually we were just having the conversation about COVID, and she drew on the whiteboard the curve, sort of what happened in China in terms of up and then flattened, and then what was happening in Italy and what could potentially happen in the United States. And frankly, that was the first time I ever saw that curve.
Right.
And then that Sunday, I had a situation where I had the governor over, who was briefing myself and a few other business people what was happening, and it was, you could see that the briefing he was getting was just unfolding to the degree that it was, but no one had clarity. Even this is now Sunday, that we're going to have to close down. This is March 8th, close down the city the way that we had to. And then as that week progressed, and as the governor was seeing the feedback as to how bad this could be, almost immediately, sequentially shut down as much as could be shut down, and so it was obviously eerie, and you went into a place where the city that never sleeps was effectively sleeping, other than sirens and essential workers. Yes. And the unknown, and then even as time went on, we had unfortunately the trucks that became temporary morgues lined up on the street because our hospital system was overwhelmed, and our morgues were overwhelmed, and no one really knew exactly how far that was going to go. Right, so that's why I say it was really the anxiety to it, and even coming back in June, when we started to reopen the offices, the streets were still very empty, and many of the retail establishments and storefronts were covered in boarded up, and so you felt very eerie. I remember walking from the subway back to my office that first morning and passing one of the famous steakhouses in New York, and it said established 1961, and here it is totally boarded up, and all I can think about is this steakhouse may never open again, like so many other establishments that were in New York.
Scott, you're no stranger to disasters. You're no stranger to catastrophes, and New York itself has been through so much. And I know that people talk and have written many things about the resiliency of New York and how it's sort of bounced back through various crises over the last 100 years. And one of those that I know is very close for you, and in your role of the rebuild of New York beyond September 11, what were some of the lessons that you learnt from that era that you've been able to sort of use in this particular situation, Scott?
So, living through 9/11, you see that the resiliency of what New York is really all about, and how we can come together as a community and almost overcome anything. I mean, I remember in 9/11, just a quick anecdote. I saw the first plane hit the towers and watched, all the horrific things that happened downtown. And when crashing, and I was walking uptown on after at the end of that day, trying to get back up to my offices, and everyone's covered in dust, and everyone's sort of walking helplessly with a phone to the ear, and there's F-15s flying over the city, but no phones are working. And I remember there was a young woman that was standing in the middle of the street, which I think was Madison Avenue, if I remember correctly, or Fifth Avenue, looking down to where the towers once were, and just smoke coming up, and screaming, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy," with these two strangers, these two other women who obviously didn't know her, holding her like she was their own child and caring for her, their own child. And it always will be burned in my memory as to a symbol of how New Yorkers come together as one, and how much stronger we are as one. And I think that sense of togetherness is a lesson that you learn. And I think that was demonstrated by us doing what everyone thought was impossible, which basically all staying at home. And to be honest, that was more challenging than in 9/11, because in 9/11, when you have that type of crisis, your instinct is you want to go, engage to be helpful. You want to go to the scene. You want to go do what you can do to be helpful. And here, the way we had to be helpful is that we had to maintain ourselves in isolation.
Counterintuitive for a New Yorker, right?
Right. No, not an easy thing. So that was one. And then the second thing that post 9/11 that was key was reacting quickly, right? Realizing that we have to be ready for the other side, and to rebuild, but rebuild in a different world. That the 9/12, everything was different than what 9/11 was. And so thinking about what are the security measures that we're going to need to put in place? What are the new protocols that we're going to need to be put in place? What are the new threats that we're going to be needing to think about, and ways that we're going to communicate that, and really, activating our teams as quickly as possible to, coordinate all those new efforts, and communicate with all of our peers and the government to understand what we were going to do, so that we would be able to reopen safely as quickly as possible. And so I think that sense of urgency and that sense of being responsive is critical. And even when we had the Superstorm Sandy, which for us in New York really was something, we had at one of our buildings, and the World Trade Center was held with when I was a vice chair of the port at the time, 50 million gallons of water or something like that. And our Starrett Lehigh building, the whole building, a whole city block was filled with water. And, our goal was we were going to get that building open for our tenants, because their livelihood depended on it, as quickly as possible. We were the first building that was in that that area, the flood zone, to reopen. And so it's also a point in time where people can differentiate and demonstrate that they understand, what the issues are, and really demonstrate a sense of leadership and compassion to help, come through. And so I think that was an important element. And then, for us also, the last piece is, I would say, is understanding that, this is not just about the people that we're immediately impacting in our buildings, but that our communities in totality were going to be suffering, right? And, New Rochelle is a suburb of New York where we're the master developer. And it was the first area that was the hot spot, where it had 100 cases. And actually they had the governor had to basically bring in the National Guard and closed off the city. And, we called the mayor. We said, what can we do to be helpful? And he was so stunned still from just living through this experience. But we immediately set up a $1 million relief fund, and really focused on people that, were food insecure all of a sudden, that never were before, or elderly people who were being isolated and didn't have access to food or even a phone to call people to stay in touch with the area. So we were, really concentrating our philanthropy in areas where we could touch the people within our community. And then even we created what we call RXR Volunteer, because we had so much outpouring of people in our buildings that wanted to help but didn't know how to help. And we knew there were so many small businesses and non-for-profits that needed help. So the RXR Volunteer, people can sign up and be matched with people that needed help. And so small business owners that needed federal support or needed their marketing plans changed for post-COVID are matched up with people. And now we have 250 volunteers in RXR Volunteer that engaging and for free are helping these businesses and non-for-profit navigate through the storm. So, it's really, you gotta, in situations like this, it's got to be community got to come first.
Yes.
You have to react, quickly and decisively, and also with a realization that to the proportions of how bad it is, right? You can't close your eyes to the new reality. And so that's a key thing. And then the last piece is recalibrate the reality of what was and just focus on what it's going to be. Because, just like 9/11, 9/12 was different, pre-COVID and post-COVID are going to be different worlds. And so you need to prepare yourself now to, maneuver in that different world.
And Scott, I just got to say, like, as a leader in the community and as a leader of RXR, it's been really great for me to watch on LinkedIn and just watching the videos. Just one that sticks in my mind was when you jumped on the subway. I think one of the first times you jumped back into the office in June or something, and you've got your mask on. And, I felt like you've been wanting to lead it out. What's that look like for you as a leader? What have you been, if you were to encourage other leaders of businesses and those that are looking to come back into cities, what would you say to them? What have you sort of done as a leader in that period?
Yeah, I think it's to be sensitive again that there is a tremendous amount of anxiety, and when you're in these situations, you can't ever over communicate. And the more you can communicate, and the more you can demonstrate by example, that's what brings comfort to people. So, I've made it a point every day. I call, 3 or 4 different customers, tenants, to speak to them, see how they're doing, any issues, what's going on, what can we do to be helpful, all the way through the beginning of when we were the stay-at-home period, right? The reaching out to some of my team members that I may not necessarily reach out to on the weekend, just to check in, how are you, where are things going, and then, wherever you can, share messages. I mean, I as you said, I did some filming of messages that I did on LinkedIn, and the reality is, I did that. It really initially just for my own team members. Said, let me just share it more broadly, because I felt it was valuable just to let people hear what was out there and what the thoughts were. But I think it's an interesting time that everyone has such a degree of anxiety and a inability really to predict what the future holds. And I think that being able to try to give people comfort through this type of period, I think will hopefully help them, but also help the recovery occur much more quickly.
Yeah, so true. Just in terms of RXR now, you've mentioned a little bit about what you've been doing in terms of encouraging your team, getting on the phone to your customers, walking the floor virtually, I suppose, on the phone, as they say, a good management technique. What's RXR doing with respect to responding to the crisis as you seek to bring your customers, tenants back to work? Now, part of this question as well, Scott, is to also think about the businesses that are so important to the vibrancy of the city as well. So how are you looking at not just RXR as a real estate company, but also the impact that you have on the coffee shops, the florists, the restaurants, the other parts that make up the great city that is New York?
Yeah, so, I think early on when, as the pandemic started to come through and I began to have conversations with our customers, what was clear to me from the conversation was that the only way we were going to build confidence to bring people back indoors to work, to our workplaces, to our restaurants, to our museums, was to really put everything you possibly can to make them feel safe, be safe, have transparency of the health and wellness of the space they're in, give them new tools to help them navigate this new abnormal in a way that feels somewhat normal. And so it was, our view was whatever we could possibly think of, we were going to try to create a holistic solution to make people feel comfortable in the workplace, and that we had to go overboard and be overly aggressive if it was going to work. And so, we immediately took our digital lab and the team that was focusing on creating, tools to optimize the workspace. And so how do we, change those tools and augment what we were working on to now think about in a post-COVID world, a holistic solution, which we created a product called RXWell, which basically, from everything from waking up in the morning to doing a wellness questionnaire on your app, seeing what day it is, if you're in a rotation, should you be coming to the office or not coming to the office, understanding if there's a staggered start time, because we're staggering our start times for people to limit public transit at the same time, or crowds in the lobby. When they walk in, their temperatures are taken with a thermoscanner. We can do 16 people at a time. There's tools that we have that monitor people wearing face masks, so there's compliance, and that if they're maintaining social distancing. We created a new position called an RXO, who's sort of a wellness concierge experience officer, and put them in all of our lobbies, so that if someone comes in and they have a fever above 100.4, the RxWell goes and brings them to a little wellness center that we set up, engages them, rechecks the fever, or if someone's not wearing a face mask, then bring in the face mask. So it creates compliance and support for the anxiety. We had the Ritz-Carlton virtually train all of our RXOs and all the people in the front desk for training. So we've had that all done during the pandemic, and then shifted everything to touchless doors, touchless elevators, elevators that are programmed to limit the number of people that come into the space. Created tools on the app that people can have heat maps where there's congestion, so you can know from your desk if you want to go get some food or go to the bathroom where there might be congestion. Created tools to change protocols for behavior, so people can see, are you social distancing X% of the day, and so you can sort of, if you're not, you can change your own behavior along the way. So a whole slew of anything you could possibly think of.
It's amazing how quickly you've been able to do that too, Scott, like just in terms of the speed you've been able to produce all of that. So you've obviously had some wonderful partners that you've worked with. Your internal team have really driven this. How do you see this season then? If we look in history, post World War II, post 9/11, post Hurricane Sandy, post the global financial meltdown in 2008, the green shoots, the opportunities, the transformation opportunities occur. What's your hope? What's your vision? What are you looking out 3 years from now and saying, I want to be able to, Scott Rechler wants to be able to achieve this. What is it?
Yeah, what's happened with COVID, it really has been an accelerant of a lot of things that were happening slowly, particularly technology, right? And I think one of the things that we've been very focused on as we've been building out within our space, and even thinking through for restaurants and others, tools to help people coexist with the virus, we've also been saying, okay, how are these tools applicable in the post-COVID world? And how can then our customers apply the information that's driven from these tools to better manage their buildings, better manage their workspaces, better manage their workforce? And I think, when you're coming out of COVID, there's going to be, workplaces are going to be very different than they were before. It's going to be, you're going to come to work for the experience. You're going to come to work for the interaction. You're going to come to the work, when you need to be there for culture building, mentorship. At other times, if you don't need that, you're going to probably be working remotely, because we now have learned you can. And so it's going to be this, this new dynamic workflow, or this, more of a hybrid workflow. So if you're a manager, it's going to be much more important to be able to understand when people are in the workplace, who they collaborating with, what amenities are being used, how is that experience really coming together? If you own a restaurant, how many tables that were 4 tops are seated with 2s, right? And how is the wait staff working, right? So a lot of the tools that we built for COVID are applicable to be able to sort of be the IoT for built spaces in the future. And so as we've gone through the process, we've developed a whole series of use cases for each of the different types of users for a post-COVID environment as well. And I think that's what we're going to see. I think it's going to be, 3 years from now, we're going to have accomplished, in this 8 months, this short period of time to put the foundation in place for what may have not even started for 8 years from now.
Yeah, that old saying, necessity being the mother of innovation, strikes me here, Scott. And you know, what I'm hearing from you as a leader of your organisation, but also a leader of your city, is to get on with it, to start building out, but also that empathy, understanding that everyone's sort of seeing this in a different way and reacting to it in a slightly different way. If you were to say something to the younger people, those that are dialing into this podcast today, or watching this on LinkedIn or whatever medium, what would you say to them?
You know, I would say there's things in life like this, you know, offer opportunities, and this is the moment for young people to step up, because it's a changed world. So any experience that any of us have who've been in the business world for a long time, you know, none of us have been this experience. So it's a level playing field, and their ability to think, you know, more in a more forward way, as to, you know, using technology differently, thinking about how you can live and work in urban environments differently that meet their needs. You know, they, you know, really can be the groups that drive and lead that change. I'd also say that it's important to move forward and you know, not look at this as a setback, but move forward even if there's challenges right now. You know, keep energized about what the future holds, but still, right now, we also, I would say, be safe and responsible. Right, while they're going through this, we got to move forward. We want to move forward and to try to live life, but we need to do it safely and responsibly, because, you know, we owe that to our neighbors. And even though they may not necessarily, you know, get as sick, there are a lot of people that, you know, could be, lives could be threatened if they end up catching the virus, right? So I think that it's important that the young people play a very active role here and can lead by example of coming back to the cities, because frankly, they're the ones that are the susceptible, right? And so, and I think, and that's what I've also seen in our organization, it's the young people that have suffered the most from not being in the workplace, from not having the mentor. You know, you can't learn. If someone gives you a task and says, do this, and you're sitting home trying to do it, you really can't learn how to do that task, because you have a question. You can't turn to the person next to you and ask that question, or you can't watch your colleague make that sales call and understand the nuance. How do you say something? How do you do something, right? So I've seen with my own kids who tell me, you know, that they feel isolated and they feel challenged. And by the way, the young kids are working harder than ever, because they don't know when not to stop working, and so they just keep going, right? And I've had to tell my teams to, you know, take the weekend off, literally, you know, and because they're working into the night and over the weekend. So it's that's also, I think, a challenge as we go through. But this is gonna impact a generation, right? There's no doubt that this generation is like I would think probably not since the Depression or 9/11 maybe, but maybe more like the Depression, in terms of the sort of the psyche of that generation, the younger group in this generation that have from living through this.
Yeah. Well, Scott, you're a champion. I mean that. You've been just absolutely devoted to getting on with life and inspiring people. And you've inspired me. I know you've inspired. I played your video at our global staff meeting last week. If you haven't seen it, viewers, you should watch it. We'll put it in the link somewhere. But just really inspiring about, not just about the CEOs, the real estate guys trying to get, you know, their office filled, but it's actually the thing that really inspired me and our teams was what is our responsibility for those that are really, you know, trying to bring their coffee shops to life again, or the florists and similar. So, you know, I just want to thank you, Scott, not just for today, but for the number of years that we've done business together. I feel like we do life together in more ways than one. And, you know, your inspiration, thank you for your time today. This has been a wonderful interview, and I hope that it inspires others to do what you're doing, which is to get on with it, lead it out from the front, and show that empathy and compassion that you show every day.
Thank you, my friend.
Scott's authenticity, his genuineness, inspired me. It was a great pleasure speaking with Scott, and I hope he inspires you. Thanks for joining. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I look forward to sharing with you in the next edition. Take care.